In this demonstration, we're now going to look at creating an Azure virtual network, but using PowerShell this time instead of going through the portal. It's often a lot more efficient if we've got a lot of networks to create, a lot of tasks to do. Instead of clicking around, adding all those subnets, it's much more efficient to do it in PowerShell. So let's head over to PowerShell to look at that. And what I've got here is a script that is attached in the course as well. So you're welcome to download it and follow along. And let me walk you through this step by step so you understand what's going on here. So to begin with, I'm going to create a new resource group called SL-network. In fact, I'm going to change that to SL-network-PShell. And so that's there, and choose our location. So in this case, I'm going to use East US. Now this location I can reference in multiple points that you'll see throughout the script, but right now I'm just storing these two values in these variables ready for me to use. The next thing I'm storing here is the VNet name and address space. So I'm going to call my virtual network SL-VNet-PShell, and I'm going to use an address space of 10.0.0/22. Now in the portal demonstration, I used a 23, and I was only creating 2 subnets. In this case, I'm actually going to create 4 subnets as part of this demonstration. So I'm going to use a 22 to give myself some more range to do that in. So then we have our subnet configurations. What I'm doing here is basically storing the different subnet configs on one. I can add more to this if I want to. So I'm saying, okay, I'm going to have a web subnet that's 10.0.0/24. I'm going to call that SL-web. I'm going to have an app subnet called SL-app. That's going to be 10.0.1/24. And I'm going to have a DB subnet for databases, and that's going to be SL-data, and that's 10.0.20/24. So those 3 subnets I'm going to create and attach to that virtual network when I create it. Then I'm going to actually go ahead and start executing commands. So the first one you see here, create resource group, that's just creating our brand new resource group. It says new AZ resource group. Name will be RG, the variable RG. So if we go to the top, the name will be SL-network-PShell, and the location it's going to put that resource group in for metadata is East US, because it's referencing that location variable there. Then if I go further down, I'm going to create my VNet and subnets. Now you'll see when I create the VNet, what I'm actually going to do here is create a variable called $virtual network and create the virtual network at the same time. So I'm creating the virtual network and going to store it in $virtual network there. So we've got $virtual network, that's the variable, new AZ virtual network, and then we can see dash name, $VNet name, dash resource group name, and I'm referencing the variable RG again. So that's going to go in that resource group that we created previously. And the VNet name, again, I'm referencing a variable. So if I scroll up, you know that VNet name is SL-VNet-PShell. Then we have location. So I've got dash location going in that same location. Again, I'm referencing the East US location above. I've got my address prefix. So I'm going to use the VNet address space here. This is the 10.0.0/22. And then I choose which subnets I want to add. So I'm going to add my web subnet, comma, my app subnet. That's the variable there. And then I'm going to add one more, which is the DB subnet. Now, one thing to note when I'm adding these subnets is you can see they're referenced as variables, but they are stored in subnet configs already. So going back up here to $web subnet, $app subnet, $db subnet are 3 variables. You can see I'm using the PowerShell command there, new AZ virtual network subnet config. And that command takes those variables, name SL-web, for example, and 10.0.0/24, and stores it as a subnet configuration. And then when I'm creating my virtual network and subnets, I'm referencing those subnet configs to create the virtual network with those subnets. Now, before we go further on, let's go ahead and run this section of the script first of all. So I'm going to highlight all of this in PowerShell and going to click the run selection here. And you'll see it goes ahead and runs. You will sometimes get these warnings about break changes that Microsoft has in PowerShell when they're making changes, and they'll reference a URL there. So let me just scroll up so you see that. So you can see there, commandlet invocation changes warning note. Go to this website here for steps to suppress this break break-in change warning. Nothing to be concerned about. In this case, none of the warnings applied when I went to the website and double-checked it. But every now and then Microsoft retires commandlets, makes changes to commandlets. But with that said, let's see what's basically happened here. So if I scroll back up, aside from the warnings that we can't do much about here unless we sort of suppress them with additional commands, but I wanted you to see them. You'll see here we sort of ran the first part, create resource group, new AZ resource group, -name, RG, -location. So that created the resource group, create the VNets and subnets. So it ran that command there and then stored the variable in $virtual network. So if I scroll down, now we can see that's our resource group created there. And if I actually go over to the portal itself and go to virtual networks and refresh, I should see, yep, I've got SL-VNet-PShell. And if I click into this one and then look at my address space, you can see I've got 10.0.0.0/22. And if I go to my subnets, I've got my 3 subnets there as indicated in the PowerShell script. So let's go back to PowerShell again, and let's scroll down a little bit more in the script. And you can see I've got some additional pieces. Now, if I want to, I can just add an additional subnet as needed. So again, I do need a subnet config. So I'm going through this process again. I'm saying $subnet config equals add AZ virtual network subnet config. I'm going to call this one last subnet for our demo here. Address prefix 10.0.40/24, and the virtual network I'm going to put it in is that same variable virtual network there. Now if I was doing this later on and I didn't have that virtual network already stored, I would have to do a get to virtual network command to get the virtual network, store it, and then I could associate it. So hopefully that makes sense for you. It's a reference in the variable of the virtual network itself. So let's go ahead first of all and run this command and click the run selection button, and you can see it's added that subnet config. But if I go back to the portal and I just refresh here, if I click off and back into this window here, you can see we don't have anything yet, and that's deliberate. What you do need to do is there's one more command you need to run. You have to write changes to the virtual network. The first time we did it, we created the virtual network with the subnet config attached, so it created them at the same time. In this case, because we're doing it later on, all we've got is a subnet config. We have to write those changes to the virtual network, and so we use this command, $virtual network, pipe 2, set AZ virtual network. So we'll click this one here, run that. Now, as you can see, we get an error here straight away. Subnet last subnet is not valid in virtual network. And that's because that subnet exceeds the range. 10.0.40/24 does not fit inside of our 10.0.0/22 that we have. So you get this error message, subnet last subnet is not valid in virtual network. And what we need to do is basically, first of all now, clear that subnet config and create a new one, and then we can go and write the changes to the virtual network. We could also just change the name as well, so that's an option for you. But if I clear the screen here, what I need to do then is type in remove AZ virtual network subnet config, the name of the subnet, and the virtual network. And that's removed. So now I can go ahead and amend that IP space to 10.0.3.0, add that subnet config back, and now apply the changes to the network. And that's completed. If I go to the Azure portal, click off the address space and back into subnets, and we can see it there, last subnet is now added. So that's it for this demonstration, and this concludes how to create virtual networks and subnets with PowerShell, and then perhaps add additional subnets later on if you need to.